Hi everyone who's joining us now. While we're waiting for everyone to arrive, let us know whether you're a parent, a teen, a tutor, a teacher, or someone else. There's a poll which will come up and you should be able to enter it there. Thanks everyone who's joined. As I mentioned at the start, we've got a poll just running live to get an idea of who it is joining. So you can quickly tap in there. But also if you've got a question for Barbara, you can ask it via the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. We're up to 107. All right, what was the last talk you gave? We'll give people a couple of more minutes to join. It's now, we're still 2 minutes early, so got good attendance. What was, Barb, what was before this one? What was the last talk you gave?
The last talk, let's see. Earlier this morning, I gave a talk for, let's see, for Alexandra College, but it was for just an interview. But then on Monday evening, our time, I was up very, very late and giving a talk for Sydney Grammar School. It was actually, I'd made a bunch of videos for them, and they are using learning how to learn all through their school. They're actually teaching the kids how to learn effectively, which is like the best tool you can give. And all around the school, they have, space aliens and neurons and focus mode and diffuse mode pinballs. And they sent me pictures. I was just blown away.
That's so fun and fully integrated. How do they do it? Do they do it as like a club outside of it? Do they do it as part of the syllabus?
Well, I made some videos for them. And they show the videos, and then they discuss a lot of the different aspects and kind of integrate it in with exercises that they do with the kids. So I'm not aware of all the things they're doing, but Simon Bailey, their head of the school, is really on top of all of that. So if anyone was interested, they could reach out and ask more about what they're doing. I was just like, wow. But I made videos for little kids, and I wore a funny hat. And that was to teach them about focused and diffuse modes.
You have a hat to hand.
No, let's see. I don't know. And it's so funny too. It's a hat we got in Kazakhstan, and it's huge. It's one of those huge hats. And so, it's a great hat. But then I did more, another video for parents, one for staff, and one for the high school boys. So, but I was just so nonplussed. They write and they say, can you make something for 3 to 5 year olds or 3 to 6 year olds? And I was like, oh my, it's a 5-minute video. How do you do that? So yeah, that was kind of fun.
Oh, great. What did it look like? Was that just you with a big hat?
It was me with a big hat, and I showed them just about focused and diffuse modes and what to do when they get stuck.
Perfect.
And that's a really valuable tool to have, because you often don't know what to do when you start getting really frustrated.
We're going to pick up on that in the Q&A. I will quickly check with Mary. We're now up to 240, which is great. I will just see if we're going to kick off.
Wow, have we got a lot of comments? A lot of hellos. Hello to everyone. Hello.
Hi, Daniela. Thank you, everyone. Hi from Saudi Arabia, from Austria.
Oh, there's a parent with a child with additional needs, including dyslexia. So, oh, shoot. I wish I had a longer time because I could talk a little bit about procedural learning and declarative learning and how dyslexia kind of relies more on declarative learning. So
maybe we can, if there are links, and you mentioned you're writing a paper, or if there are areas we can follow up, Mary is helping us with all the follow-up, and so we can maybe send something to people afterwards as extra reading.
There's actually a discussion of this in my upcoming book, which is going to come out June 15th, called Uncommon Sense Teaching. And that one is, it's got a lot of, so it's also geared, so parents who have children on the autistic spectrum, these individuals are predisposed to learn more procedurally. And so if you ask them to explain what they've just learned, they may know it very well, but they can't explain it, but they still really do know it. So I think it's valuable for us as teachers and tutors to know that, oh, they got it. And actually, I'm just going to frustrate them if they ask them to explain it for me. And so, you know, it's okay sometimes to just know something without being able to explain it.
Okay, Mary has just put a link from MyTutor in the chat on your upcoming book, and we'll send that to everyone as well, so they have it. Uncommon Sense on the follow-up.
Okay.
Great. Well, we're 3 minutes in, so I think we might kick off. It looks like we're stabilizing around close to 300 people, which is great. Here we go. The poll so far, we've got just over half people are parents of teens. We've got 140 coming in there. We've got 23% 60 are teens, 10% are university students. So a lot of those will potentially be tutors on our platform and helping people to develop those skills. And then we've got a bunch of people from other backgrounds, and a lot of them will have introduced themselves on the chat already. And thanks so much to all of you already who've introduced yourselves in the chat. So nice to see so much engagement and everyone coming in. I'm Bertie. I co-founded MyTutor to make life-changing learning available to everyone. And we've helped about 50,000 students so far with one-to-one tuition. One of the biggest gaps we see, though, in today's education system is that despite 16 years of formal education, for most of us, we never formally learn how to learn. And so in Barbara's own words, and I took these from your interviews, we've got chess clubs, we've got art clubs, but we don't yet have learning clubs. And I agree with her that teaching teens how to learn is one of the highest impact things we can possibly do. So today we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Barbara Oakley to talk about how teens can build healthy learning habits for life and get their learning back on track after all the disruption of school closures. So Barbara, a quick intro, and then I'll hand over to you. Barbara is the author of 14 books on education and learning, including Learning How to Learn and the upcoming Uncommon Sense, we just shared a link for. Her Coursera course, Learning How to Learn, is one of the most popular online courses ever. I think you've got 2.8 million students signed up so far, and she's permanently improved the way those students study and learn, and me included, having signed up for the course and then loved it. So Barbara, over to you for a quick presentation, and then I'll ask a few questions before handing out to everyone else to ask the Q&A. And just a quick reminder, the Q&A is in the bottom for any of you. Just a link at the bottom of it if you have any questions you want to ask.
Okay, well, so I have so much to share that I want to dive right in. I'm going to give you some insights into ways to help you learn effectively. Of course, one of the most effective ways to learn is actually just by using a metaphor. And if the metaphor is something that is, so for example, you might think about the flow of water as being analogous to the flow of electrons. And that's how electrical current works, is somewhat similar to water. That can help you a lot to just devise metaphors for whatever you're working on. But if your metaphor breaks down, you get down to a quantum level on electrons, just throw it away, get a new metaphor. But metaphors are key. And in fact, they're so important that I thought I'd put them right at the very beginning. So for me, I grew up moving all over the place, at least in the US. So by the time I'd hit 15 years old, I'd lived in 10 different places. Now, the problem with this is that when you're learning math, it's highly sequential. So if you get a gap anywhere, it can be really hard to get back on and jump over that gap. So for me, I was moving from Lubbock, Texas to Chelmsford, Massachusetts when I was about 7 years old. And they were suddenly very far ahead of me in the multiplication table. So I didn't like math much to begin with. And so I just kind of gave up on it. 7 years old, I flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science. I sort of self-identified as a math idiot, and which certainly didn't do me any good, but I was a little hard-headed. So, but it is ironic that I could be so terrible at math, and now I am actually a professor of engineering. I'm actually a distinguished professor of engineering. They gave me a distinguished award a few weeks ago. I was kind of surprised at that. But what this tells you is that it is really possible to, even though you've had big gaps like we've had due to COVID, you can jump over those gaps and find ways to still excel. All you have to do is have a little motivation to do that, and a few of the tools that research is giving us about how to learn more effectively. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, one day, one of my engineering students found out about my sordid past as a math flunky, and I was, of course, his professor of engineering, and he asked me, well, how'd you do it? How'd you change your brain? And I thought, well, how did I do it? Because I was this little girl, and, I just love that picture of me because
Barbara,
yes.
I think the slides I've got, which you shared, haven't yet been shared.
Oh my, all this time. Well, there we go. We're going to fix this.
I was waiting for the pictures just to check. Here
we go. Okay. So see this picture here. It's like, I look so adorable in this picture, and it's like the last cute picture of me. So I'm glad you pointed this out, because if nothing else in this presentation, seeing the picture of me was, as a cute child, was worthwhile. But I loved animals, and I loved knitting and weaving and all those kinds of things. But I didn't like math, and so I didn't know what I could do when I grew up. I thought, well, maybe I could learn another language. Now, Bertie was very lucky. His father insisted that he learn another language, but I had no one around me to insist that I learn a second language. So I wanted to at least try it, see what it's like to think in another language, but I couldn't afford to go to college. So I found out there was one way you could learn another language and actually get paid for it. That was to join the Army. So that's me, looking super scared because I'm really clumsy and I'm about to throw a grenade. But the thing is, I did learn another language. I learned Russian, and I ended up out on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea, and I just love new adventures. So I ended up also at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, and that's where I met my husband. So I often say I had to go to the end of the universe, or at least of the world, to meet that man. So when I was 26, I was in the military. It taught me Russian, and I went to get out of the military at that age, and I found out that recruiters were not knocking at my door to help me, get a job. No one was just interested in a person whose sole professional expertise was the ability to speak a language. They wanted someone who had more. Like, speaking a language was good, but they needed more. And I remembered the West Point engineers I'd worked with in the Army, and these individuals, they had, I'd look at their books and I'd look at the text in it, and it would look like a foreign language. And I thought, now wait a minute, aren't I supposed to be open to learning new languages, having new perspectives and adventures? What could possibly be more distant from who I am than to become an engineer? And so I decided to give it a try and see if I could change my brain and actually learn in math and science, which, if you had talked to my 7th grade algebra teacher, you would know that he would have thought that that was one of the most unlikely events that would ever occur. But so I worked away, and I wrote a book about learning. And as I was putting that manuscript together, I got lots of insights from many top teachers and professors around the world about how to learn effectively. One of the tidbits they gave me was that something they found the best way to help their students learn was to use metaphors. So I reached out to top neuroscientists, top cognitive psychologists, and what I'm going to share here are some of the best insights from research about how we learn effectively. Now, the brain, as we know, is very complicated, but fortunately, we can simplify its operation into 2 fundamentally different modes. The first I'll call focused mode. And this focused mode is what you often do, like when you're going to be trying to catch up in your learning, you'll do a lot of focusing on the material as you're studying it. The second mode is what I'll call diffuse mode. And that's actually what you're happening when you're relaxing and you're not focusing on anything in particular. So maybe you're going for a walk, or walking to the store, or taking a shower, or falling asleep at night. But to better understand these 2 different modes, I'm going to use can you pull the word to mind? Hopefully you've got it. A metaphor. And the metaphor I'm going to use is that of a pinball machine. Now, if you're my age, you remember what a pinball machine looks like and how it works, but probably you're not my age. So I'll give you a little example of how a pinball works. You just pull back on a plunger like this one, and a ball goes bouncing around. And that's how you get points, is when the ball hits those rubber bumpers. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this pinball machine and we're going to move it right onto the human brain. Are you ready for it? Here we go. So there is our pinball machine on the brain. And this is a metaphor or an analogy for the focused mode of thinking. In this mode, you often have these pathways that are already laid by virtue of the fact that you have already learned the material. So if I asked you, if you knew multiplication and I asked you to multiply 74 times 25, you might pull out a sheet of paper or even do it in your head, and your brain's thoughts would follow right along in the pathways that have already been laid. But let's say that you're trying to use or learn something completely new. So it would be as if you already know multiplication and you have all those pathways laid, but you're trying to learn division. So how do you learn something new? You have to somehow get these new pathways in place, even though you don't know where they're going, what they're doing. How do you learn something new? What often happens is that you'll have this sort of, well, let's say you're trying to work your first division problem. So you're trying to work it, and your mind, your thoughts are trying to go along that pathway, but they sort of slide back towards multiplication because, multiplication's a lot easier. And then you can't solve the division problem. So you get more and more frustrated and upset because you can't solve this problem. And finally, you close the book in disgust and you walk away. And when you walk away, you actually are, you fall into the diffuse mode. So I say walk away, but what I really mean is when you get your focus off of that material. So it's not still sort of, rolling around in your brain and you're consciously thinking of it. You got to kind of get it out of your conscious thinking. That opens this diffuse mode up. And in this mode, your thoughts can range much more widely. So here you can see they're bouncing randomly around. They can't think in that careful, focused fashion that you can think in when you're in the focus mode, but you can at least get to the place you want to be and to look at subjects in a new way. So for you or your children, when you're trying to learn now and you're trying to learn rapidly to catch up with what's going on due to the epidemic, what you want to do, you'll focus as hard as you can. When you get stuck on things, which you inevitably will, you can either move to a different topic, maybe a little easier topic, or you can get up and go walk around for a little bit. Active motion, like moving around, is a really good way to get some ideas from the diffuse mode. So I will often, I'll be working away. I'll have a problem when I'm writing something, when I was doing, engineering work. Get up, walk around, go to the bathroom and move, maybe make a cup of tea. And when you come back, you can be surprised at how you'll have a fresh perspective that can help you through things you didn't understand. So when you're learning things, it turns out that you often have to go back and forth between focus mode and diffuse mode. Focus helps you kind of first get it in your mind. Diffuse helps it kind of rattle around those thoughts so that you can put them together in a way that are understandable. It makes it more understandable when you get stuck. Now, focus mode is often called by psychologists the task positive network, while diffuse mode is the task negative network, or neuroscientists call it the default mode network. So there's a great deal of research on these two different modes of thinking. Now, let's see. So this takes me on to one of probably the biggest problems for students, and that involves procrastination. So that will probably be one of your biggest problems now when you're trying to get yourself back on track. One of the nice things is that when you first sit down to do something, it seems like it's the biggest chore, an unpleasant task in the world. But once you begin working on things, it starts to actually become interesting. So why does it feel so unpleasant when you first start? It turns out that when you even just think about something you don't like or don't want to do, it activates an area of the brain, the insular cortex, that experiences pain. So the brain, naturally enough, looks for ways to get rid of that negative stimulation. And it does something like this. You get this unhappy feeling, and so you turn your attention to something else. And the result, you feel happier almost instantly. But of course, you've just procrastinated. So the best mechanism I've found, and I have heard from people around the world that they absolutely love this technique, is the Pomodoro Technique. And this is really effective to help you overcome procrastination. I procrastinate. Everyone procrastinates. I will find myself, I'm facing some really difficult task that I don't want to do. Of course, I fiddle around a little bit, and then I will set a timer and I will begin doing a Pomodoro. And it's really quite simple to do. That's part of the power of the technique. But you first just turn off all distractions. So it's easy if it's turn off your phone or put it in a place where you can't easily get at it, or turn off the pop-ups on your computer. If you have a 2-year-old at home, good luck with that distraction, but just do the best you can. And then set a timer like this. This is like Francesco Cedillo's Pomodoro timer, his original one, because Francesco Cedillo devised this methodology. And of course, he's Italian, and Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. So you set that timer for 25 minutes, and then you focus as intently and as diligently as you can for those 25 minutes. Your mind will often be a monkey mind. Like, I will focus really intently, check the clock because I know I'm almost done, and I've just done 2 minutes of the Pomodoro. And my mind will scream, I cannot do another 23 more minutes. But I return my focus, do almost like a Zen thing, and I just keep doing the Pomodoro. But then comes the most important part of the Pomodoro, and that is the reward. So a 5-minute or so reward at the end of each of your Pomodoros is the optimal way to begin programming your brain so that it likes to study without distraction. And it's that reward that can do the trick. Now, if you're just starting, I would reward yourself with anything that you really enjoy. So go play a video game, or talk with friends, or it's best though if you move around while you're taking this break and getting this reward. So if you go make a cup of herbal tea or whatever, or something of that nature, optimally, you just move around and do something mindless. Walk around a bit, go walking up and down stairs. If the more you focus, like let's say that you use that time to go take a peek at your phone, your cell phone, well, you think you're not going to answer, but suddenly you'll see you got something, and then you're focusing again. So you want to try to avoid looking at your cell phone during that period of a break. Now, good learning is a lot like baking a cake. It has so many different ingredients. One of the most important ingredients in good learning, it involves your neurons. And this is a little drawing of a neuron. And it's a little bit simplified, but I know this is where you're thinking, this is the really boring scientific part of the lecture. So you're going to tune out, but don't tune out just yet, because we're going to use a metaphor. And the metaphor we're going to use is that of a space alien. And so you can see the eye of the space alien is kind of like the body of the neuron. And space aliens have these legs, and those are analogous to dendrites on a real neuron. They have these little weird looking toes. Those are dendritic spines. And then above their head, they reach out with an arm that's called an axon. So what neurons do actually is they just love to reach out with their arms and tickle the toe of an adjoining neuron. That's sort of how they get points. They really, that's the way they do things. So we can see that in real life. Here's a neuron coming up. it is sending a signal to across that finger onto the toe and onto the next neuron. And so that signal is your thought in reality. It is more complicated than that, of course. Here, this just shows you very quickly that when the signal is coming up to the gap, there's little neurotransmitters there, but that gap is so narrow that they go across very quickly and send the signal to the new next neuron. Now, the main idea here is that when you learn anything, you're creating sets of links between neurons in long-term memory. So you can think of it as when you learn how to take a derivative in math, or how to conjugate a verb in French, or how to make a move on your skateboard. Whatever you are learning, you are creating sets of links in long-term memory. So, so when you practice, here's the thing. As you practice, you strengthen those connections. So that's why practice is so very important. These neurons are somewhat like links in a chain. So the more you practice with them, the stronger and richer those sets of links become. So this also brings me to the value of metaphor. When you have strong, rich sets of links in your brain because you've learned one concept, you can use that to much more easily begin to understand a new concept. So metaphor is really powerful because it helps you bridge off of things you already know, even if they might seem absurdly unrelated, as for example, the flow of water with electrons and how they move. Now I'm going to ask you something that is very, very important, and that is, what do you think is the most powerful technique to help you learn most efficiently? And I'm going to give you 4 options. Bertie, I don't suppose it's possible that you can, and he's already way ahead of me. Okay, so here's our 4 options. And we have, let's see, we've got rereading, highlighting or underlining, retrieval practice or recall. That's like using a flashcard or looking at a page in a book and looking away and seeing if you can retrieve the key idea from your mind, or creating a concept map. So there's a typical concept map right here. So ding, 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 ding. So if you can give your, what do you think is your answer? And then Bertie will close the poll shortly here.
All right, just controlling that. How are we doing?
Okay. There we go. Oh my goodness, look at this. This is so good. When I first began like 5 years ago, everybody picked concept map. And look, now many people are beginning to understand that retrieval practice really is the be all and end all. You might think it's rereading because, you know, you're repeating things, but actually rereading, you can let your eyes go over it without really thinking about it. If you have to retrieve it from your own brain, you do have to think about it. Likewise, if you're just highlighting, your hand's moving, but you may not really be thinking about it. If you have to retrieve it from your own brain, again, it is really strengthening those sets of links. And likewise, concept mapping, they've done many studies and found that just concept mapping just isn't nearly as good as retrieval practice. So they even did retrieval practice with concept mapping and found it was pretty much the same as just retrieval practice. So I think it's just the idea. I mean, if you had a concept map and you retrieved it out of your brain, maybe that would be better. But it's simple retrieval that's actually the key. So let's see, the reason retrieval practice is so powerful is because when you're first learning something, for example, I am showing you something right now, talking about a concept, and it lays this faint set of links. But every time you pull that set of links, you practice and you're pulling it to your mind, you are strengthening those sets of links. And so that's why it's such a valuable, valuable technique. You're strengthening those sets of links. You might say, well, no, teaching is much better. Everybody says that teaching is the best way to learn. Why? Because you're doing retrieval practice. You're pulling it as you're teaching other people. So virtually everything is, if it's a good technique for learning, has to do with retrieval practice. If it's not in your brain, you haven't learned it. You haven't learned French if you're using Google Translate. So sure, there are some relatively trivial things that you can always look up, but if you are thinking that learning involves just being able to look things up, you're off on a not good pathway, because increasing evidence from neuroscience says if you don't have those foundational sets of neural links regarding that concept in your own brain, you really haven't learned it, and it's going to cause you troubles later on. So if you, let's say you're studying something now and you're busy and you don't get around to practicing with it, here's what happens. Actually, your little synaptic janitors can kind of erase those sets of links because they haven't been practiced. So, daily practice is a very good thing to do with new things that you're learning. Another thing that's very important is sleep in learning. So when you are first learning something, of course, you're making a connection. But when you really make that connection strong and build it is when you're sleeping. Actually, during sleep, it's like, especially if right before you go to sleep, look at the really key thing you want to be learning, trying to remember, or whatever. Think about that, bring it to mind. And then when you go to sleep, it's like signaling your brain, oh, practice with that idea. And it will do that. It will practice during sleep. And in fact, this is a light microscopy image of a dendrite that's before learning and before sleep. And it's a living dendrite. So this is a light microscopy image of the same exact neuron after learning and after sleep. And as you can see, there's look here, there's a little blue triangle pointing towards this new dendrite that has emerged during sleep time. So sleep time is when a lot of consolidating of the learning you've done during the day can take place. So if you don't sleep very much and you're cramming a lot, that can make for very problematic learning. You spend all this time trying to learn stuff, but you can't make those connections very well because you're not sleeping and kind of sealing them in place. So this is why it's so important to do spaced repetition. If you have 5 hours to study a topic, space it out. So it's 1 hour one day, 1 hour the next, 1 hour the next. Don't just sit there and try to cram those 5 hours of studying in at the last minute, because the connections are very weak and it's a lot easier for your synaptic janitor to just sweep those connections away. So when you space out your learning, you're actually not only learning during that day, but you're repeating that learning during the night. So it's like you get twice the bang for the buck. It's almost like you haven't done 5 hours, you've done more like 7 or 10 hours because sleep is reinforcing everything. You can think of it metaphorically as a little bit like building a brick wall. If you lay a layer of bricks, a new layer of mortar, bricks, and then before you go too high, you let the mortar dry. And if you don't do that, it's a very poor foundation for learning. So learning takes time. It's just like it's a muscular structure. I mean, neurons are analogous to muscle cells. So it takes time to develop those cells. So, don't just try to cram at the last minute. Certainly this guy didn't do that. Now, as we're closing, I just want to say that sometimes we think some of our best attributes are really bad. And I would like to tell you that, for example, poor memory is actually a good attribute. It can be. And the reason I say that is because if you had to work really hard to get something in memory, a lot of times your working memory isn't that good. You can't hold things temporarily very well. You get something all in mind and then whoo, shiny, something, distracts you and what you had in mind falls out. But when something falls out, something else comes in, and these individuals are often very creative. So poor memory can often go with creativity, and you don't want to give that up. Do you have to work harder to keep up with the intellectual Joneses? Absolutely. But as you will see, it works very well. Now, some people complain that they are slow learners, and especially nowadays, it's a tough thing because you're trying to play catch up with getting back on board after the pandemic. So, but actually, slow learning can be an advantage for you. You think about it. Some people are really fast learners, so they're like race car brains. They can get to the finish line really fast. Other people are more like hiker learners. They can get to the finish line, but it's a lot slower. As they're walking, though, think about what they experience. I mean, they can reach out, they can touch the leaves on the trees, they can smell the pine in the air, see the birds. It's a completely different experience, and in some ways far richer and deeper. Now, my hero in science is Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who was a terrible student growing up. He was actually kicked out of a number of schools. He was a problem child. He had a bad memory. It was hard for him to learn. And he became a professor of anatomy through much dint of labor. And then he won the Nobel Prize. And then he is now considered the father of modern neuroscience. So it was like not even enough that he became the winner of the Nobel Prize. And he was asked, how did you do it? And he said, well, I was persistent. So he practiced to build those sets of links. But he also said, I'm flexible. And by that, he meant, he said, I'm no genius. And he was not a genius. But he said, I've worked with many geniuses. And the problem with geniuses is they're so used to learning quickly, always being right, that they jump to conclusions, don't look carefully at what's going on in the real situation, and can't change their minds when they're wrong. So if you are no genius, rejoice, because sometimes you can do things that even geniuses cannot. So with that, I would like to thank you so much. And Bertie, it's back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barbara. Well, look, we've had a lot of good questions through, so I'll cut the 3 I had down to 2, and then we'll open up with some of the questions from the panelists.
Okay.
And the first one, you talked about Santiago at the end. You also talked about your own feelings in some of the press interviews of your own feelings of inadequacy that gave you empathy for students who feel hopeless at times. What would you say to a teen who is lacking a bit of confidence at the moment and feeling a bit behind after such a disjointed year?
Oh, be happy that you feel this way, because the ones who I worry about are the cocky ones who think they're going to go and just do great. So actually feeling really uneasy and uncomfortable, like maybe you're not up to the task, will help you to be more open to trying harder and doing better. So I always say it's best to try to accept the idea that you can grow comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. and that will serve you in good stead for many years to come.
That's lovely advice. And then one more for me before I pick up a few that I've heard in the chat. Over half the people joining this evening are parents who will have used MyTutor to help their teens fill in gaps. You've talked before about discussing problems with others, especially those topics you're having the most trouble with. Why is it, and when is it important to get help when you hit a stumbling block?
I think as soon as you start really realizing that there's a problem. Like, I was really lucky in that my older sister, when I was trying to change my brain and learn in math, she gave me some extra tutoring, and it made a real big difference in how I could become successful. So I would say, like if you can, every day, every time you start running into a challenge, you try to get someone to lend you a hand, and you'll see that as you become better at it, you won't need so much hand holding, but having someone right there, especially as you're trying to get back on track, is going to be invaluable, because teachers do their best, but there's nothing like having an individual tutor who can really pinpoint exactly what needs to be done. So, I say reach out early and often, and in the long run, that will serve you in good stead, so you won't need so much help.
And also, I mean, so something to kind of chat quickly around the book. We're definitely going to share your resources there, which have been a huge help to many. Just to start to pick up on some of the questions that came through in the Q&A. We had one from Assi that was similar to one from Alison. Assi asks what you think about the use of rewards as a means to help motivate kids to learn. And
okay.
I think Alison's too, because it's quite similar. Alison had a question around rewards too, and how taking a look at your phone, well, that is a good reward. And if not, then why? And she's asking because she finds it tempting to do that, and because she needs to be a 14-year-old.
Okay, so rewards are perfectly acceptable in learning. So early on, there was some research that said, oh, rewards are bad. They won't provide for intrinsic learning, but a lot of time, or intrinsic motivation to learn. But I mean, it depends on the reward. You don't want to be like saying, oh, you're going to get a cookie every time you do your math homework or something, because that's not a good reward. But if there's something that a student likes to do, like playing video games, the reward can be that they can watch video games or play video games or something of that nature. Video games, I should note, are not all bad, especially the action style video games, where you're in mortal danger because, you're battling against the enemy or something of that sort. Those have been found to be remarkably good for increasing cognition, and not only in younger people, but especially in older people. So, for example, there is an excellent article by Adam Gazzaley and his team in Nature where they show the brain and the reaction and cognitive aspects of a 65-year-old with, or 65-year-olds on average with, just no intervention versus an intervention that involved these kinds of action style video games. Their brains were actually more active than just a typical 20-year-old's. So video games can be really nice as rewards. Why do I say don't go look at a cell phone as a break during a Pomodoro? It turns out, so let's say you're learning something and you're making those sets of links in long-term memory. Mostly you are learning declaratively when you're making those sets of links, and that goes through the hippocampus. It turns out your hippocampus, as long as working memory, like as long as you're talking to the student, their working memory and their hippocampus are like focusing on you. But we need the hippocampus to kind of turn around, metaphorically speaking, and practice with the sets of links that are developing in long-term memory. That hippocampus cannot turn around and practice as long as you're focusing on something. So looking at your cell phone means you're not getting the ability to truly like let your hippocampus take a break, relax, and offload some of those practice sets of links back into the long-term memory and the neocortex. So you really, little times of doing nothing are invaluable for not only for good learning, but for becoming more creative. So is it a little boring to go out for a walk and not have something to entertain you? Yes, but you'll start finding you have some really good ideas that way.
Okay, Alison, hopefully that gives you some good, arms you both to convince yourself as well as to convince your 14-year-old. The next question, again, I'll do one more from a parent and I'll switch to a student. Leo had a question, and then one of our tutors, Megan, had a question. So Catherine asked, again, like everyone else, really enjoyed your talk so far. What do you think of revision plans and timetables for GCSEs age 16 in the UK? And like how many hours a day would you revise? So I guess thinking about creating a revision plan for a student who's about 16 years old, any sort of tips about how to think about that?
So let's see, I was just answering a chat thing. So see, this shows you that, okay, so there we go. I think, so did I, why is this not, there we go now. That's good there. Okay, so so this shows you that multitasking is a very bad idea. So you didn't ask about multitasking, but actually you can see that if you're doing one thing and you turn and do something else, you cannot do the first thing very well at all. So it's always a good idea when you're focusing to try and keep your focus on what you're supposed to be focusing on. So bad me, but it illustrated the point quite nicely. There are a few, there's like 2% of the population that can actually successfully multitask, but most people cannot, and I am included in that batch. So anyway, back to you, Bertie.
So this is just a quick question from Catherine. She was just asking for tips around revision plans and timetables, and she had in mind sort of pupils age about 16.
So it is the question then involving our learning the time?
Like how much time would you put into it, and how do you get a sense for whether it's too much or too little?
Oh, that's such a good question. But it's a very hard question to answer because some kids don't need to put in very much time at all to learn their times tables. Other kids need to put in enormous amounts of time. And so some kids need more practice. For our own two daughters, so what can happen is so here's the thing with math. Little girls and little boys have the same math skills, but little girls actually are better verbally and little boys are actually a little delayed verbally. And the reason for that is just that, some of the different hormones cause verbal advancement or verbal delay. And what happens is little girls they can think they're better verbally than they are at math because on average they are, even though on average they're the same capability in math. So what this really means is if you want little girls to feel like they're just as good at math as they are at their verbal skills, you want to give them extra practice. So what we did with our two girls was I made them do 20 minutes of extra math practice for like a decade. So I had them in a program called Kumon. And but what that did was it was just a little bit of daily extra practice, and it helped to build the solid foundation for all the main ideas of mathematics, or the the key foundational ones that you learn through high school. This extra practice made an enormous difference. So like our older daughter would have been one of those little girls that's like, I can't do math. It's not me, because she's so verbally advanced. I mean, she could memorize a poem at a drop of a hat. But with all this extra practice, she became her dream of becoming a doctor. And she's actually just finished her medical school residency at Stanford. And our younger daughter, who was just like, I'm never doing math. That's just not me, So we just made her do it anyway. Well, now she loves math and she's getting her master's in statistics. So, just give practice a program that allows for mastery learning. So you're actually just at each level, you're getting the amount of practice you need to really understand that level before you move on. And that varies so much by students. Some students get it really quickly, some need much more practice, but individualized attention can make a big, big difference.
Great. And then just quickly switching to one of the questions from our tutors. So Megan had a question around your best advice to a future tutor. Another tutor was asking, often their tutees really know their stuff, but get nervous during the exam and blank. Do you have any tips for exam anxiety when trying to recall information?
Yes. Okay. First off, when you're practicing for exams, do as much retrieval practice from your own mind as you can. So you can know it on paper, but if you have not, so you think you know how to solve problems, but you're not really aware so much that maybe you're looking over at the solution a little bit. So being able to solve problems cold without looking at the answer and being able to do that in your own mind will do a lot to diminish this sense of you get and you look at the test and there's nothing there. You have to have those sets of links in long-term memory for it to be, for you to do well in any kind of test. The thing is, though, you can for most students, that's the key. For a few students, they will have test anxiety and they really do know the material really well. So if that is the case, attention to breathing is a fantastic way to help. So like Navy SEALs, nurses in emergency situations and so forth are often taught breathing techniques. A good one is to count, it's called box breathing. So you breathe in very deeply to a count of 4. So for 4 seconds, then hold it for 4 seconds, then breathe out for 4 seconds as deeply as you can, and then hold it out for 4 seconds. And if you do that for a few cycles before the test is handed out, just at that time where your hands start getting all clammy and everything, it can be invaluable in helping to calm you down, because a lot of times the nervousness, you think it's the test doing it to you, but it's actually you doing it to you because you're so nervous, you forget to breathe. This box breathing kind of forces you to get the oxygen and the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide that you need. So this can be very helpful, but not only for test taking, it's also great for doing public speaking.
Okay. I'm going to switch now to a couple of questions that come through from students. Leo says he's struggling in remembering information for his geography case studies despite intensive revision. And I know you've spoken a bit before about like importance of sleep and breaking that up. Jerison also has a question around advice around how to revise for an exam. So a couple of questions coming from students around revision techniques. Okay,
so I think that when you say the word revision in Britain, that is the same as studying for an exam in the US. Is that right?
Like
okay, good.
Going back over things you've studied and learned already.
Okay, so I was when I was studying and I was trying to really learn in math and science as an adult, I would revise very carefully. And I'd set things up all through the semester so that when I was doing those final reviews, it was much easier. So for example, on key problems, when I was studying through the semester, I might have, like, I'd have a book, and let's see, do I have a book? Well, what I do is I just take a piece of paper and I would tape it. So I would write all of the answers for key questions on that page. Let's say it was a page of questions, and I would tape my page with an answer onto, just a little piece of tape at the top of the page. And then I could go and look at the question, and I'd usually practiced enough with it that I could kind of do it in my head. So it was like water that flowed out. I was really procedurally fluent, but I could easily check it by just lowering that sheet where all my solutions were. So it was very good that I didn't just, mostly I'd never like just Xerox solutions and put them there, because that does not mean you've got it in your head. I always made sure it was something that I had solved and I knew it really well. And that's what I would do. So I think setting up all through the semester as you're going along, it can be very helpful, just so you have like super simple, straightforward materials to review when it comes time to review. That's probably one of the best ways I know of. It's all in how you're preparing all the way along, and if you're just kind of keeping up as well as you can with the materials, that's a good thing to do. One thing that can be very helpful is to plan your days, and this is an insight from Cal Newport, so that you say, I have a quitting time of like 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and I will study until that time. And this was what he would do in college, obviously, but he would stick to it, and that would force him to really focus during the time he was trying to focus, because you're so ineffective sometimes when you're kind of trying to focus, but you're not really focusing, and you waste a lot of time that way. So having a deadline when you're going to cut off and go into diffuse mode can be very helpful.
That's helpful. And on the topic of sort of cutoffs or breaks, there are a couple of questions coming through around music and whether that was both effective while you're learning, but also as a form of break.
Oh, okay. So music is a complex topic when it comes to learning. One thing they have found is that students with ADHD can sometimes be helped by listening to somewhat rhythmic music while they're studying. So this idea of music is always bad is not necessarily true. However, you don't want super loud music, and it's better to try to get music without vocals. Just in that if you're trying to do something verbal and you're listening to words, it's like driving while you're trying to read. It doesn't work very well. So if you have a good capacity working memory, that means you can hold a lot of things temporarily in your mind. Like if I gave you 47535, how long and how easily and how many numbers can you remember? That's an indication of how big your working memory is. If you have a pretty good working memory, that means, or pretty big, usually you can take notes and also be paying attention to the derivation, for example, that the teacher is making. If you're not such a good working memory, which I don't have a good working memory, you take notes, but you can't like simultaneously be listening to the derivation. You're just really more taking notes. So for that kind of person, who also, for example, Friedrich Hayek, another Nobel Prize winner, was that kind of person. He could not take notes and listen to the professor. So he would listen to the professor very carefully and borrow notes, and it worked for him. That's, let's see. I think that's, did I answer that question, or was there any remaining nuance that I missed?
I'm sure there was, but because we're coming to time, what I might do, I might ask one final question.
Okay.
There are a couple of things which we didn't get to. Some people asked about high function autistic children, whether these are, and autism came up a couple of times. I know that's coming up in your book, and Uncommon in your next book. So I think we'll send the link for that as well, so people can follow up. The last question, and that's Uncommon Sense Teaching. The last question I asked was from her team, and that was, you picked up earlier on diffuse and focus mode. Her team was asking, does switching between the two, is that relevant across different subjects? So maths, the arts and languages. She was asking, is that a universal principle?
Oh, yes, it does seem to be. So when you're focusing on a task, whether it's learning a language, learning a math, so it's called task positive network, because there's some task section of your brain usually that's activated. It can be somewhat distributed, but it's mostly related to that task. Whereas diffuse mode is kind of a wide network of different connections that arise. And this is the kind of stuff that happens when you're mind wandering, daydreaming, and so forth. So this, I mean, it happens in humans all over the world, and it happens pretty much in anything you're studying. That's a really good question. I'm going to have to think, though, is there a lot of artists and creative writers and so forth spend more time in the diffuse mode because it's part of the creative process of what they're doing. So meditation, for example, I better get this wrapped up, but this is such a good thought. So meditation, there's two different main forms. One is like mantra type meditation. This is often it activates the focus mode. And if you do a lot of focusing, and then you focus as well for when you're kind of relaxing, there's evidence that that actually can suppress the diffuse mode. On the other hand, if you are doing kind of mindfulness, open monitoring meditation, that can enhance the diffuse mode or default mode network. So different types of meditation can have different effects on the body. Some good, some maybe possibly even not getting you where you want to go. If you want to be more creative as a result of the diffuse mode, maybe more focusing is not the way you want to go. But on the other hand, if you want to be more creative and you're really an anxious person, then maybe focused is the way to go for you because it gets you out of that anxious default mode network. So anyway, it's cool. Learning is cool.
Great note to wrap up on. Thank you so much. You've given us lots of really actionable stuff, and I hope it's as much of a game changer for teenagers looking to get their learning back on track this year as I found it when I went through your course.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Everyone's engaged. There's been great engagement on the chat. Huge thank you for that. We'll be emailing out a link to Barbara's recent and upcoming books. There've been lots of questions about that, as well as her free Coursera course and the recording of this session. That will be coming to you via email tomorrow morning. For those still on the chat, if you have a spare second before you pop off, we'd be really grateful if you could just leave a small bit of feedback on how you found this webinar. But we'll follow up with a more detailed survey, but just a quick temperature check would be super helpful. And with that, thank you, everyone. Enjoy what's left of your days, depending on what time zone you're on. And a huge thank you again, Barbara.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bertie.